So you remember yesterday's conversation. Yesterday's conversation was about how longitudinal waves create immortality, a form of immortality, by being perfect wave distribution, charge distribution. We're going to look at the visual of that again to review. But so then an outline of where today's lecture is going to go with that information in terms of designing the hygiene for successful death, for example, and lucid dreaming and soul group migration. In terms of plasma science, that's what this is about. So we introduced the concept of longitudinal waves as the only way in and out of the doorway through the speed of light and therefore immortality. And all of the magic that we've talked about the last few days, the key is longitudinal waves, as we said, scalar, torsional, many names. And then we apply that, for example, to the definition of heaven, Hey Ave, breath of flight, plains of Sharon, the death vision geometry, Heinrich Clouvet, Ray Moody's work on why the death visions are contagious in terms of plasma science, the design of burial ground, hospital, and birthplace for death and birth, why there's a hole in the Swiss chalet and in the tubes above the pyramid for navigating your plasma. So the plasma science of successful death and how that applies to your immortality, not just at death, but in the lucid dream and in the soul group work. So then we talked about the soul pod, Amenti Amarna, what Akhenaten was doing with Solar Temple. The example of Intihuana's prism is a fractal there at Machu Picchu. And we'll apply that to Templar meridians, William Bueller, the Templar work. And then a summary of plasma projection, taking the silver seed to the new home in the sun. So that's where we're going with it. That's just an intro to today's conversation, to understand the real science of what spirituality has talked about so well for so many centuries. And now we see that the plasma physics fits the beauty of spirituality. So again, now that was just a quick little taste. So we're going to do the review here now. So remember, this is just a review of yesterday. So we said that if you understand how the transverse electromagnetic converts the inertia from up and down the spiral on the cone, called optimized translation vorticity, and what went in going up and down comes out going compressionally, longitudinal wave, faster than light, cause of gravity, the mechanism of burial ground, the mechanism of DNA radio, collective unconscious, and all healing, all ability to penetrate the nucleus, all ability to go faster than light, all ability to have action at a distance. The reason the Therify works, for example, as Tom Bearden said. And so then yesterday's conversation, this was review, that if you understand how longitudinal waves are created and work by this phase conjugate embedding, where magnetic lines cross in four-wave mixing, where the pine cones kiss noses, if you understand the longitudinal wave mechanics, then you understand the cause of gravity and gravity waves. You understand the cause of charge implosion, neg entropy, and self-organization. You understand the physics of isotope transition, non-destructive charge collapse, called alchemy, alchem, chem, access to the black hole. So, and then you understand perfect isotope transition, the nature of fusion. All fusion is non-destructive charge collapse, which is Einstein's own name for gravity. And the collapse of charge is non-destructive only if there's a way out through where the pine cones kiss noses. And that way out for charge is the longitudinal wave. So if you line that up, you can make gravity. And I proved by equation, the golden ratio, radii of hydrogen, that's the reason hydrogen is able to make gravity. So unlike Einstein, Stephen Hawking, and NASA, you now understand why an object falls to the ground.
No.
That is quite critical.
No.
Well,
no, I hear what you're saying. I don't understand it.
Good, okay. Well, Einstein proved that there's no experiment that can differentiate acceleration from gravity. So, for example, when you're standing in an elevator and it accelerates, that feeling you have of being accelerated is gravity according to Einstein.
Yes.
Okay. So now we explained yesterday how this is the only process that turns compression into acceleration of charge down this cone, which I proved is the structure of hydrogen, of course, DNA, and every living protein, all these things. So these waves, when they cross recursively at these points, they add and multiply the phase velocity, called speed, or wavefront acceleration. So a portion of the inertia that was going in rotation is now converted, and remember, the wavefront velocity, called phase velocity, recursively heterodynes, adds and multiplies constructively, which only golden ratio allows recursive constructive heterodynamics. That's why it is a solution to compression. And why the solution to compression is a solution to every problem we have. Physics, metaphysics, it's all there. So now this wavefront has experienced acceleration, adding and multiplying of the wavefront phase velocities, and has been accelerated through the speed of light at only the Planck dimension. And that acceleration is the longitudinal waves propagating, which we have proven accelerate faster than light. So when that charge, remember charge is the only definition we have of mass and time, rotation of charge. When that charge experienced that acceleration, we name that experienced acceleration gravity. Are you with me? Okay? So that process of accelerating charge is only accomplished by golden ratio phase conjugation, which is the only definition of fractality. And most physicists now agree that fractality caused gravity. They simply don't understand how until I wrote my equation. And our newest paper with Jennifer is going to be the final equations for how fractality causes gravity. But again, that was yesterday's conversation. So today, we want to apply that method.
There's a question here.
Please, go ahead.
So you equate charge to mass in the equation E is...
When charge rotates, it stores inertia, the only definition of mass, yes.
And we have the equation E is mc squared. And you were saying that your wave is traveling faster than light
Yeah.
at the exit. At the same time, you're saying there is no charge loss.
That's right. That's right,
So
exactly.
you're saying E is mc squared.
Actually, no, that difference, the small amount of charge that experiences that acceleration is the loss of energy that's turned into gravity. So there is some energy exchange there. But it's quantum, it's relativistic, it's very small. So that's a very appropriate question. And we're dealing with that in our yes, there's some of the inertia that was mass becomes acceleration, becomes gravity. And that difference, that ratio of that inertia is what our new paper is about, exactly. It's so tiny.
Sorry.
Yeah.
My follow-up question.
Yeah, remember we're...
If your speed is greater than the speed of light by...
Actually, Raymond Chow, what Alan didn't mention is that many measurements faster than light, the most famous is Professor Raymond Chow, and all of his measurements center between 1.5 to 1.7 times c, the speed of light, which would confirm my hypothesis that it's golden ratio 1.618 times c, which proves my theory of gravity. Yes?
Okay, this is news. Because now you're saying...
Professor Raymond Chow, very famous.
No.
Yeah.
I'm comparing not with this professor reference, I'm comparing with the presentation of yesterday. Yesterday I heard, maybe not in your presentation, that the addition in the speed of light was measured at 30 nano.
Yes, that was Alan's. I didn't quantify this.
Yeah,
But please.
that was incorrect.
And
Yeah,
there
but
are,
I'm a little confused.
yeah,
Because,
there are
please
many measurements that's on.
clarify, you are saying it is faster than the speed of light.
Yes,
Please
absolutely.
clarify how much it is,
Well,
and
that
what and how you measure it.
actually very quick. And Alan began that conversation yesterday. We don't have time to do the details today, but I would refer you to Professor Raymond Chow. I learned to measure faster than light from Guy Oblensky, actually, but he never got to what Raymond Chow did. No, and what Raymond Chow did, and Raymond Chow did not use the velocity propagation heterodyne differentials through the optical fiber cables in scope that Guy was doing. So I think, and there's a lot of work on this, and we don't have time for it here, but I think that is the most famous, and he was very clear that the summary of all his measurements showed 1.5 to 1.7 times c, the speed of light. So that would just center beautifully at 1.618 and make my day. But that's still controversial, you're right. I'm going to hold some questions till the end, but please, if you have...
So, just a quick question.
Yep.
So, you came up with the equation before a lot of physicists actually were able to measure gravity waves, right?
Actually, my equation, my fundamental equation, I have two fundamental equations. Planck length and time times integer exponents of golden ratio predicts
Right.
all those variables that produce negative entropy, like photosynthesis. The second equation is integer exponents of golden ratio times Planck length of C produce 3 exact radii of hydrogen. That was my new equation. And now we're extending that to show in other ways how to prove that that's the reason hydrogen is able to make gravity.
Yeah, which makes sense. And based on what they measured of gravity, it looks like it's in a golden ratio.
That's basically. And a lot of physicists are already there. It's actually old news. We're just finding the equation to prove it. So that's the fun stuff, and that was the background. That was yesterday. So now today's conversation is mostly about this line. The mechanism of lucid dreaming, remote viewing, collective unconscious, communion of saints, ancestral memory, DNA radio. We have lots of names for this. So we want to now we understand that that's all about plasma. Your aura is plasma. And what is plasma? Plasma is a weak cloud of charge. Remember we said the universe is made of charge, 99.99% plasma, right? So what is plasma? It's a cloud of charge. What is a cloud? Remember what charge is. And this was the question that Elizabeth Rauscher, one of the world's most famous physicists, asked me at our conference in Budapest, actually. What is charge? She didn't know. It's okay. She also didn't know why objects fall to the ground, and we love her. But what is charge? Charge is the ability of the compressible media, which flows like a liquid called the ether, to be compressed and rarefied, and which is the yin and yang. And the plus and minus charge is the compression and rarefication of waves of charge in the ether. That's what charge is. And it just happens that when that rotates, it stores inertia, the only definition we have for mass. And when that rotates, it has a period, our only definition for time. We discussed that yesterday. So now you know what charge is. So plasma is a cloud of charge. Well, that's pretty simple. What's holding it together? Well, normally in physics, plasma is usually hot, because heat is what keeps the electrons excited and wandering around having fun. But in this case, the fun stuff is if you can have a cloud of plasma that doesn't require heat. Remember some people, when they touch the plasma tubes of the Therapy, can actually feel a little bit cold. It actually has a chilling effect, as Schauberger's vortex did. Schauberger's vortex, when it was going to begin to generate power in the water from gravity, would spontaneously get colder. So that is called negentropy, the title of the book. Yep. So how is it that implosion creates negentropy? It creates suction to center, sometimes called electronegativity, sometimes called a black hole, sometimes called gravity, sometimes called centripetal force, sometimes called implosion. But whether you use any of those words, that's what holds a cloud of charge together without heat. Now remember, in today's medical literature, one of the hottest topics in medical literature today is using plasma to treat disease. Cold atmospheric plasma, CAP. If you research that, you'll find hundreds of papers. Cold atmospheric plasma treats cancer. So this is not news. Actually, this is old news. So we just think we have the best physics for understanding how to keep plasma in a cloud, centripetal, without heat. Remember now, we are talking about your aura. Okay, we're talking about your ka, your boat to the underworld. You know, what is making your plasma centripetal around your body? Obviously, the electric field of your heart, which is imploding for one thing. So now we're thinking, oh, I got this bubble, a cloud of charge, and when I die, what can I take with me? Well, not this, but that. So I'm an electrical engineer here standing telling you we can do the instructions for successful death, which is the same as lucid dreaming and bliss. And it's very good electrical engineering, and it fits perfectly with spirituality. But if you know the electrical engineering, you can do it better. So that's what this conversation is about. So next thing we're going to look at is the actual geometry of death. So this is called, it starts with Professor Karakov, and many of you have seen parts of this conversation before.
Let me ask you a question.
Quickie.
What I wanted you to clarify how the plasma beam that came in, when I asked them, did it increase their energy? They said it increased their energy.
Increase, yeah. Therify
They were
increase.
able to stay in it. They were able to stay within the beam. They didn't jump out. They didn't feel the
Actually, when Medrick and Christine have just arrived, and they're going to talk about clairvoyance with the Therify this afternoon, at medical clairvoyance, and they also have experience with working with plasma entities, and you said it was a ghost releaser as well. They have experience with that. And we're about to now see electrically why imploding plasma is a ghost releaser. That's exactly where we're going right at this moment. Okay, so here is Professor Karakov using UV and infrared to measure ghosts. Very common, actually. It's well known. This is old news. The other thing that's old news is the fact that the presence of a ghost is indicated by a cold spot in the room.
Yes.
Now, thinking about just what we've discussed just now, you understand why, correct? That the ghost is basically like ball lightning, which is very much susceptible to telepathy commonly. And so the ball lightning is imploding. In order for it to gain inertia, it has to implode efficiently. So it's sucking in the charge from its environment, which is why the therapy works so much better if there's charged living air in the room, because that plasma ball needs to implode its environment, which is normal. You do that. Every plasma being needs to do that. It's why you don't see an orb in a metal building, but you see lots of them where they just cut down trees, because there's lots of plasma available to implode. In dead air, it's not going to work. Elementals don't live there. Negative ions don't live there. Therapy doesn't live there. Okay? It's living plasma requires. So, in the process of making these measurements, Professor Krakow was also able to show where and why a ghost goes after death. Now, we don't have time for that that's another whole lecture, but basically, in Castaneda, you have to be able to find your place of power in the room. And see, then you find your place of power. Now you're imploding more. In architecture, it's called sacred space. And we're going to be describing half a dozen ways to measure that with Patrick later today as well. And when Patrick sets up the pyramids, and you'll see the sacred space in the center, and Patrick, and you work with pyramids. So the implosion point for charge is essential for a ghost. That's where it goes. Why? Because that ghost needs to turn compression into acceleration. Oh wait, that's just how we define gravity. You see, the ghost is looking for the inertia to enable it to be accelerated. Looking for the inertia to enable it to be accelerated. Think about that now when we see the geometry of death. So this is from our friend Professor Karakow's book, Light After Life, and he was, for example, he would measure with very good replicability, confirming the Tibetan, that if you measure the finger aura, and he used cadavers, the typical time it takes your aura to leave your body after death is 10 and 36 hours, which is simply they're averaging the amount of aura left in the body with the GDV medical Curlian tool. So, but unfortunately, if the death was not a peaceful death, you get troubles. Actually, this ordered field is not so good if the death is not peaceful. It's really the peaceful death is very important. To line yourself up, literally line yourself up. So this is the Orlean, this is the Book of Life, and this is a German Die Seele, the soul. And so now, the next part of this lecture, we talked about the, remember this is a long lecture, we're just giving you the highlights, the soap bubble. The soap bubble is your aura and how do you blow it, and how does a cathedral access the grid? Machu Mandir looks like a virus for a reason. And this is Daniel Brinkley. I'm sorry, no, this is Alex Ray, thank you. And what are you doing? The pine cone is kissing noses. Okay? So the process of dying is imploding in a fractal. Well, that's good. And here's the pineal, and this is a whole lecture. Here, this is this slide I wanted to show you. This is the capacitive coupling proof. The gravity waves travel faster than light. And that's Hodolonic and Ramsey. I just wanted to mention that the other day when we were in that part of it. Okay, here we are. This is the subject now. The subject of this part of the conversation is called the Heinrich-Kluve form constants. And most of you have heard me talk about this before. That Heinrich Kluve assembled a large number of near-death experiencers and a small number of LSD experiencers. And he said, well, what did you see when you died? And they drew him pictures. And yes, first we saw a lattice, then we saw a tablet, then we saw a tunnel, then we saw a spiral. And so this was actually replicated and actually recently, I have to say my hair is standing up. Thank you, Dan. Our wonderful friend Danny Schreiber, who had aggressive leukemia in Australia, died a few weeks ago. And a very psychic lady who is his lucid dreaming partner, Fiona, and we want to thank you, Fiona, called me out of the blue. I didn't know her. He was my friend, but I didn't know her. She called me. She says, Danny Schreiber just called me. I said, well, he died a week ago. He says, no, we were lucid dreamers partners. He's there, he's in touch. And he was all excited. He said, yes, I saw that. It's true. It worked. He said, quote, Dan Winter was right. The path of death is... And he described Bliss. And he actually, I have the quotes of it. This is the article, goldenmean.info/immortality, and that story is at the top of the article. But he gave us another piece of the puzzle. He said, in addition, he heard a deep audio beat heterodyne. He heard a binaural beat. Hello, Patrick. That's food for your lecture later today on the binaural. So, when he died, he reported the details, and that was an additional detail. Perfect, huh? Implosion. So, what's going on here? So I did a geometric analysis, and basically it's quite simple. The lattice cobweb tunnel spiral, a lattice is basically a tetracubic array, right? It's just a cubic lattice. But if you tip the cube up in a pentadodeca, then it has a center, and it looks like a cobweb. If you take the dodeca down and ratchet it down a helix, then it looks like a tunnel. And then if you bring that helix thread of DNA into a center point, making the next longer, you braid the DNA, it looks like that X. It looks like a spiral. And then you start over, and the DNA gets thicker and thicker and thicker. And what's the DNA doing?
Braiding.
Recursively braiding and imploding, embedding longer and longer waves into short ones called phase conjugation. So your DNA is imploding, and to do that, it's creating this centripetal force and negentropy. And what is it doing? It's accelerating you through the speed of light into success. That's what's happening. Now these are the drawings that were done by, I should credit this correctly, this is Ann Ting, Geometric Extensions of Consciousness. Beautiful work. And look what she's doing with the DNA. Same thing, lattice cobweb tunnel spiral in the DNA. It's all there. I mean, my hair's standing up. It's fabulous. Beautiful work. So I want to say that I really would not take credit for discovering the lattice cobweb tunnel spiral bit in what DNA is doing. All I saw, my new information was, oh, that fits what they saw when they died.
And that actually fits the science, because DNA does exist as a toroid in the body.
Thank you, toroidal DNA, and we have papers on that. Thank you, Glenn. Excellent. Exactly. And Glenn actually measured that increased amount of braiding when you have Bliss, which is part of where we're going, at least when you have coherent EKG. Yeah, well, they're close, yeah. Okay, so what does it all mean? So here's Ray Moody, and I love Ray Moody. He worked with all these books about death, right? And his latest thing, and we lectured together in Torino many times. I love him. He's a sweet little man. And he's all excited because all the surgeons and doctors are coming to him and saying, when we're standing over this dying person, we all see the same thing. We all have visions, and he's proven, and he's got dozens of articles and books. Look up Ray Moody. And the proof is with all surgeons and top-level medical people, they're clear. Death visions are electrically contagious. The data is in. No argument, the data is clear. So the death vision is electrically contagious. We are clear on that as scientists. So what does that mean? Little black hole, right? The implosion point, centripetal force, center of the tornado is perception. Why is the death vision contagious? I can tell you Kundalini is contagious. I knew that even before my own because I watched them drinking Muktananda's bathwater. That's right. It was, you could have measured that, couldn't you? I personally, but the peacock feathers work. I mean, they were. Yeah. So they were the Baraka, Shaktipat. We got all the names. So, what have we learned about the process of death? We've learned that charge acceleration gets you into this perfected distribution of charge called He Ave, where the breath of charge, He, amorphous and space-filling, 5, Hebrew, takes flight, Ave, He Ave, our word for heaven. So Lawrence Gardner did a great service when he looked at David Hudson's science, and he said, yes, indeed, the Hebrew name for heaven, plains of Sharon, is actually the infinite capacitive field of the electron shells of a monoatomic gold. Okay, so this is literally, it's a half a book about that, the sacred art. And he's worked with David Hudson. He forgot a few things like astral hygiene, but that was Lawrence Gardner. And what I would say that the purely chemically derived gold powders are quite dangerous. They do burn a hole in your bowl. The organic ones, as Paul is talking about, are much more safe and beneficial, like the agricultural ormes that Roger is developing commercially, hopefully, with Leyland Midner in Australia. Beautiful project. Because the agricultural monoatomics are contextually derived from deep sea water, which are high in rhodium iridium annulates, the phase conjugate dielectrics, the source of Kinton water, for example, very famous. So Lawrence Gardner's there saying, yes, we analyze, and under the right conditions, the electron shells around monoatomic gold unpack and unpack and unpack. And he realized this was actually the legend in Israel of what's called the Plains of Sharon, heaven. You know, and every culture has its own name for heaven. But what do electrical engineers call heaven? I'm one. What do I call heaven? I call heaven a fractal field, a place where Chuck.com. This has been a short personal ad. No. So the ability to achieve perfected charge distribution has everything to do with successful depth. That's why the Hopis were correct to actually stage a rebellion about the U.S. government the day they wanted to put steel sewage pipes into old Arrivi sacred burial ground. They were correct. Because the memory of ancestors can only propagate if. That's what this lecture is about, is if we understand that once, we can fix our sacred burial ground, which is the most important thing to do in any indigenous culture. The most important thing to be doing. Why? Ancestral memory is your library of survival information. And that library can only be there if the field is fractal, charge distribution permitted, embeddability, the fractal field. So this is why the first lesson we give in every biologic architecture course, after you learn a little bit of geobiology and dowsing, maybe from Stefan, the first lesson is, well, you go to your bedroom and you make a magnetic map of your bed. Then you make a magnetic map of your house and yard. Then you make a magnetic map of your city. And rearrange the magnetic lines to look like a rose. That's the first lesson in every biologic architecture class. And by the way, Gary Skillen famously could tell immediately who was going to be sick in that house. You didn't tell him anything, but he went and made a magnetic map of everybody's bed. And he knew who was sick right away. Okay. So that's the first lesson, step number 1 in biologic architecture, is make a magnetic map of your bed. And basic dowsing skills, you don't have to be the expert to like Stephen Cardin, who can clairvoyantly see the Hartman Curry Pay Ray Palm lines and know the free. It's good, but the basics, to feel a simple magnetic line cross. Actually, there's one right here. Why do I feel that? Some people, I have my hands relaxed here. I'm relaxed. I feel quite a distinct tingle in my fingertips. And it's quite a bit stronger here and much weaker here. Okay? So basically I'm feeling, and now if I went and looked for the cross point on that line, I'm doing the beginning of finding out where the Earth's magnetic blood is flowing. And that's the beginning. And you get more sensitive to that with every Bliss experience you have. Because your DNA braids implodes, and you can ride the long wave. Uncle Joe, you can feel the long wave, right? So that ability to embed and feel the long wave evolves with the more bliss you have, because your aura unpacks and you're touching longer waves. And remember, the Draco Uru Nephilim, the ones who had lipid blood and breathed in nitrogen, breathed out cyanogen, they had higher frequencies in their EEG, up to 44 hertz, Tibetan Gamma, yes. Excellent telepathy, but you know what they didn't have? The phase propagation velocity was much higher in their silicon nerves. They didn't have any long waves in their EEG. As a result, when Enki Osiris chose which human to choose, monkey basically, to do the first genetic experiments, he chose the one where he saw empathy in the early primitive humans. He saw empathy, and he had never seen it before in his life. I tell you, this is our leverage in this conversation with the ETs, but that's another story. That's another story for another day. But you see, the ability to embed in the longer wave is actually what makes us what I call a vaccine in the Orion Wars. They were called the Oxygen Wars, and again, that's another story. But where I want to go with this next here is about Amenti and Amarna. But first, maybe, were there any questions just about that part before? Yes?
When you say long wave, to me, as a scientist, sorry here, that means a long wave length, which means a shorter frequency. I thought higher states of consciousness
the serpent Ouroboros eats its tail at both ends. The infinitely high frequency is exactly where you touch stillness, which is the infinitely low frequency. That's obvious. But where we're measuring this in let's take the EEG work as a specific here. So yes, the Tibetans can make 44 hertz, the Tibetan gamma, which we now can measure with flameandmind.com, thanks to Patrick. And we know the people with high frequencies they have better telepathy. But to be coherent down in the long wave, the 8 hertz and below, the 4 hertz, the theta, the delta, that is access to the collective unconscious.
So it's more about the coherence rather than the frequency.
Well, remember, the low frequency is a longer wave here, very clear. Yeah, so that low frequency, 4 hertz, 7 hertz, when you're down in the delta and the theta, you want access to lucid dreaming? You want access to ancestor memory? They call it theta healing, but not many people measure it, but we do. We measure. So anyway, ability to embed in the longer wave, which is what's happening in DNA when it's recursively braiding, it's putting the longer wave on the short. The long wave wasn't there in the DNA before it braided. We had only short waves. When the DNA braids, it envelops, embeds longer waves. And when it does that recursively, like you said, the toroidal DNA is relatively long wavelength for DNA. So embedding a longer wave generally is the ability to feel something bigger than you.
So it's bandwidth, not frequency. It's not like you want a higher frequency, you want a wider bandwidth.
Exactly. Thank you. Precisely, Paul. And that's why we always say the Theraphi is better than Laplace, not because of a different principle, because it's broader bandwidth phase conjugation. So the ability to connect the shorter and the longer waves that are in one structure means the more self-aware it is. So when you do a spectrum analysis, for example, the best way a doctor has to find out if you have an immune system, the quickest way to find out, is to measure the harmonic inclusiveness of your HRV, heart rate variability. If your heart rate is variable, lots of different frequencies, that's how you measure immune health. Very simple. If your heart rate is stuck down in one frequency, prepare your hospital bed, you're toast. Your immune system's gone. So that's why they call it healthy heart as a fractal heart. And as we know, golden ratio solves that problem of how do you get the maximum number of harmonics in inclusiveness, non-destructively, called phase conjugation. So harmonic inclusiveness measures your immune system. So what is that? Perfect braiding, perfect embedding, perfect netification. What do they call it in new string theory, twister theory? There's a name for it. Embedding. There's lots of names for perfect embeddability.
In music, it's harmony.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So we want to now apply that to what is our job. Okay, this is we're sitting with the hero in Kurt Vonnegut's novel Breakfast of Champions, drinking whiskey for breakfast, which is the breakfast of champions according to Vonnegut, and we're trying to answer the question, which is, what are people for? And it appears that physics doesn't actually have an answer. It appears, for example, that the sun went to a lot of trouble to make us. And it appears, I have the slide, and dig it out later, I should have put it, but it's measured 11 different times that when over 1 million children sang the same song at the same moment, the number of solar flares went way down. Been measured many times. So clearly, collective human emotion has the ability to make a centripetal force that the sun apparently likes, and perhaps even needs. Okay? So if we were to ask the sun, what are people for, I think the sun actually has an answer. And if you talk to any we started this group called the Solar Heart Community, the Solar Shamans, and we were teaching people to do this vision of how to go through the heart of the sun. And there's hundreds of shamans who report going there and seeing an eyeball. And actually, Jennifer, do you mind if I mention this? So Jennifer, if you want to talk to somebody who saw the eyeball in the sun, ask Jennifer. She's had the experience. And we have many shaman who report. And actually, I will be honest, that many of those shamans, we had the Essene Saint Grace here in France teaching this with us, how she went through the heart of the sun. And she did it with the process David Samuel described about watching the sunrise and sunset exactly at sunrise and sunset on the water horizon, conjugate four-wave mixing, the physics of Agnihotra. So going through the heart of the sun is not new. What I was going to say to you is that I will admit that some got dizzy. Many got dizzy, actually. Going through the heart of the sun should only be done when you have become a shareable wave. But anyway, we know by measurement that not only, as Bill Tiller proved, does focused human attention cause electric fields to compress. That's well documented. Bill Tiller's famous book, Conscious Acts of Creation, a wonderful physicist, I know him well. And it was clear in his book. He had measured it dozens of ways that focused attention causes charge to compress. That is fundamental. You need to know that. He didn't have a clue. He admitted quite clearly he didn't have a clue of how that worked. But he was absolutely clear it was measurable. So then later, Uri Geller less famously measured the effect of focused human attention on radioactive half-life. And indeed, like implosive capacitance like the Ark of the Covenant, focused human attention measurably reduces radioactive half-life. And we can understand the physics now quite simply. It is electrically centripetal. That isn't very complicated, is it? Right? So obviously the function of humans has something to make centripetal force. Now we're going to talk about soul pod and the function of Amenti Amarna. This is, we want to understand what Akhenaten was up to. So this next little part of this lecture is called Akhenaten's Mystery. Now remember, Lawrence Gardner and Ahmed Osman both agreed that when Akhenaten, Atun is Enki, when Akhenaten screwed up his assignment, well, first I need to say what his assignment was. Akhenaten was a breeding experiment from the Syrians. That would be a short, my hypothesis, actually not my hypothesis, book, God King Akhenaten by Daniel Stewart. And it makes sense because we believe that Enki's mother's line was essentially Syrians who designed the Ark of the Covenant, which is this implosive capacitor. Another long story. So the royal line of Egypt was called Thutmoses, which literally transliterated means sons of Thoth. So the royal family of Egypt was literally a lineage of Thoth Hermes, which is the Enki side of the family, named Atun as in Akhenaten. And that side of the family was Syrian. Oh, okay, distended skulls, scoliosis, Marfan's disease, Akhenaten. Old news. So Akhenaten was given a job, which he screwed up, frankly. He screwed it up. His job was to make a solar plasma accelerator, which is required for the evolution of the gene pool, actually. The solar temple, call it the Temple of Jerusalem, lots of names. We have a few pictures here. And what happened was, maybe we dig up pictures. This is, there's two articles on this. One is goldenmean.info/Amenti concordance. Here we go. Yeah. So we could also start with Robert Lawler's Temple in Man. So the whole thesis of this is that the temple is a plasma geometry designed on the symmetry of the human aura. You could put it that. So that a temple is another name for a plasma accelerator. That's the core concept here. And so Akhenaten's task, and here now, oh yeah, this is Intihuana's prism. So this, we're talking about the place for birth and death. This is at Machu Picchu, and this is for birth and death, and the alignment for plasma acceleration is exquisite here. And this is where it's set, and the sunrise on the 21st fits perfectly, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. This is goldenmean.info/Peru/Amenti, these articles. So these are plasma accelerators. That's our subject. Yeah, there's the sun coming through at the right moment on the 21st, June 21. And this is what we wanted. This is just a little example. So here you're catching. So there's a certain plasma wave arriving here, a very specific aligned plasma wave that could kind of, we could say, blow open your pineal gland. And this is called Intihuana's prism. And I just want to give this as an example. See how this dolmen here, precisely lined up with Intihuana's peak behind it, which is the nose here. And this is fractal to this. And that casts a shadow of charge, which is implosive. And that alignment is called a plasma accelerator, which is an introduction to the concept of what temple is for. Basically, the only way in and out of Earth is through the speed of light through the heart of the sun, the longitudinal wave, clearly. So now back, and this is the Puma, which is the geometry of Cuzco, and Sachihuama. This is another, there's the shadow of Intihuana's prism, and there's the star map. So I wanted to do the Amenti Amarna pictures here. Are they here? Oh, here they are. Just a couple. Okay, so Akhenaten got a homework assignment. They said, go out and build me a solar plasma temple so that a group of people, if they have learned how to lucid dream and then how to lucid dream together as a group, if they would then do their collective bliss experience in time and space, which is fractal on the roads, if they do all of that right, then that soul group, that soul pod, that amenti, that amarna, could be plasma projected through the heart of the sun. Doesn't that sound easy? No. Oh.
Yeah.
So what they're saying here is that the Syrians knew that the only actual chance for survival for humans was to take their collective plasma cocoons, learn how to fuse and bed them, form a soul group. You know, soul groups form when you laugh and cry over every pain in each other's lives. You know, you meet together every week and you meditate, you do yoga, you have dinner, and then you cry for each other's pain. And eventually you learn how to lucid dream together. Remember, we defined lucid dreaming. We're quite clear. Your attention is on the longitudinal wave. You can inspect something at a distance and come back and find out it was testable, it was real. And eventually you can meet people in lucid dream. What that means is the longitudinal component of your aura has begun to propagate coherently, which is what the Egyptians called the Ba from the Ka. So when that's done as a group, it's called a soul pod. It's what Amenti was for. This is why the war is about, the war was about Jerusalem. Uru, Asa, Uru means ancient Draco or dragon blood. Asa means queen of or royal line of. El means the place of the phase shift, literally the conjugate cone. Uru, Asa, Elam is where the ancient dragon queens went for the El to be phase shifted and translate their vorticity. Literally, quite literally, a stargate. And just to give a little plug for Teresa and Alan, who will be speaking tomorrow afternoon. Today. Okay. Teresa and Alan will speak a little bit about Ophanim Enochian, the plasma symmetry language of angelic calls. And I remind you that, and I will dig out the pictures later, but the famous glyphs in the movie Stargate, literally in the film, they used the Ophanim Enochian. And we're going to show you, hopefully, sometime later, the actual symbol syntax of the plasma shadows of vortex called Ophanim Enochian, which is the only language of angels, which is simply how you angle plasma donut vortex wormholes. So, where are we at? Okay, let's step back a minute now and say, okay, Akhenaten got a job and he screwed it up. He tried to do the one God thing and he tried to make the solar temple. What happened? Well, it's boring. But what happened was he had an argument with the bankers. Isn't that boring? Yeah. The argument with the bankers was called the Amun priests, which is Enlil's side of the family. They were the bankers. They ran the old temples. And the old temples were angry because Akhenaten canceled all the old gods. Oh my goodness. He tried for oneness. So did Einstein and Jesus. You know, they wanted the unified field. So anyway, Akhenaten had a big argument with the bankers and he couldn't balance his own checkbook. And I remind you, actually, that's called being grounded. And Akhenaten had a little issue. So I'm suggesting being grounded. You need to know the spiritual cosmic stuff, but also balance your checkbook, because Akhenaten didn't. So what happened was he ran for his life. You know, we're familiar with that. And he changed his name to Moses, which means Moasis, which means son of, and he became a gold powder cook and founded the Essenes, and that's called the righteous priest. And that history is not mine. That's old news. That's out of Egypt, Ahmed Osman, and hundreds of other books, including Lawrence Gardner, who was no slouch as a historian. They all agreed on that story. And there's lots of variations on that story, and it's not even an important story, actually. Like the argument that I never won with Vincent Bridges was, physics always trumps history, that if you learn the physics lesson, you can wake up from the nightmare that's called history. So I always say, I'm not going to argue about the history, but I am going to insist on the physics lesson. Okay. And the physics lesson here is, you know, how do you get immortal? How do you propagate your charge? How do you become a longitudinal wave? How do you get your attention changed in such a way that when you close your eyes and you're feeling lots of charge, you can actually see pictures at a distance, which is your mind cohering the longitudinal component called astral travel, lucid dreaming, remote viewing, and successful death. Many examples of that story, for example, in the book Nine Faces of Christ, they took him, which supposedly was Jesus in that story, they took him away from his lover, and the only way he could see his lover was in the lucid dream. And the first time he went, he could see her, but he couldn't hear her. And then he could hear her, but he couldn't smell her. And each time he went, he took another organ of perception with him. In other words, his aura became more coherent. And as that happens, you can take more organs of perception with you into lucid dream. So that's the practice of cohering the aura, the ka from the ba, etc. Okay, so now let's see where we are with respect to the curriculum for this course. Any questions just at this moment? Yes? Okay. So we wanted to make the point. Oh yes, we forgot the Templar part of this. Yes.
Dennis got a question.
Go ahead.
When you talk about accelerating the plasma, is that what the Therapy does? And what is accelerated? Is it the spin? What in the plasma is accelerated?
Well, clearly, simple longitudinal science would tell us that the difference between the inertia going up and down in transverse to the inertia going this way in a longitudinal, that is not itself acceleration. Because I have an animation of the difference between transverse versus longitudinal in ocean waves. And you know how the tsunami is coming across the ocean? It's going at 600 miles an hour, but it's mostly, its inertia is mostly this way. And then when the tsunami hits shore, it hits the slope of the shoreline, which is here. And when the tsunami hits the shore, the transverse, the longitudinal is raised up here and becomes transverse, right? So you don't see the vertical component when it's in the ocean. So the actual molecule in the ocean is only experiencing this, right? If you ever watch it, and the amount of the inertia in the wave in the ocean that's going up and down is called transverse. And the amount of the inertia of each molecule that's going this way is called longitudinal. And every wave has some component of both. However, if you translate most of the transverse inertia into longitudinal, that process itself is not acceleration. But the longitudinal has the capability of being accelerated. But that acceleration through the speed of light, remember we have many examples of measuring faster than light signals, for example, Hodowanak and Ramsey's gravity work, that acceleration is dependent. And that dependency has to do with grid alignment. The short answer to that question is, when they cross like this, then no problem, you can be faster than light. But if they don't cross like this, because what happens here is the longitudinal waves can cross recursively and bounce that radio efficiently, and that's why it goes faster than light. Actually, what happens is, it's like a billion billiard balls lined up. They all touch each other, and you bounce one at one end. A billion miles away, one will bounce off the other end, almost immediately, right? But if those billiard balls were separated slightly, and then you bounce one here and wait for the one to bounce off the other end, it'd be lifetimes. So that ability for all of the billiard balls to touch each other, total stillness, non-destructive compression between them, allows for charge propagation velocity efficiency.
So it's a speed.
The Goldman ratio. Everything about this is Goldman ratio. Everything. So when the waves cross like this, which is why it is now proven in the physics literature the universe's primary arrangements of mass are dodecahedral, as well as the Earth grid, DNA, and zodiac, and all the good stuff. Because that propagates not just gravity radio, but DNA radio. And in that geometry, the superluminal is efficient. So it's why you can't make phone calls to the ancestors unless you walk around to one of these points on the Earth grid. Because that's called longitudinal embedding. And access to that longitudinal radio is the mechanism of all the fun stuff. Ancestral memory, DNA radio, all the cool stuff. So that, where the magnetic lines cross, remember, the first cross where laser optics measured the onset of phase conjugation, neg entropy, all the fun stuff, was called four-wave mixing. We know that. You've got to cross the lasers very accurately, just at the cross points. Then, once you got that lattice cobweb, thank you. Once you have that lattice cobwebs tunnel spiral together, then the next thing is the cobweb, the dodeca. So once the grid is stable, the cubic lattice, then you can tilt the cube 32 degrees, rotate, blink 5 times, and that's called dodecahedron. And that's the first time you made golden ratio. So it's all about the geometry of the grid, which is all about optimizing by golden ratio, actually. So that's what achieves efficiency in that charge propagation velocity through the speed of light. That's why it's so important to me that I'd like to prove Raymond Chow's work, that the primary velocity modes measurable at faster than light are 1.618 times c, which is why it was made my year when I saw that Raymond Chow was on that right track. I thought, oh cool, we're getting the data now. Okay, so have we finished our lecture? Roger says we got about 8 minutes. And the bottom of this was the Templar Meridians book, Rochelle Grid, and Summary of Plasma Projection. That's how we're supposed to end this lecture. Let's see if we can accomplish that. So the Templar grid is here. I'm now giving you examples. And actually this relates to Glenn's question. So here is a Templars. This is goldenmean.info/Bueller, as in William Bueller. And here's a Templars, and they're doing lots of work to be sure that the magnetic line cross points of all their cathedrals and structures fit this, what's called the Rochelle grid. Okay, this, by the way, I don't know if David Samuels, I'm sure David Samuels, you've seen this, but this is Malta. You'd love that. It's Malta. And David Samuel is called the navigator. And Dave, you want to tell them that story? You were on the top of the peak on the island of Malta, and you saw the birds.
Yeah, and on Commoner.
On Commoner.
The city stop there.
With Valerie.
They are not the synchronic lines. They're the intergalactic lines.
The synchronic, they call it synchronic lines. Right, she's right there with it. Yeah, and so David says to Valerie, look, those birds are going to turn when they get to that point. And they did. How did David know those birds were going to turn when they got there? He knew. He knew intuitively. But the reason the birds turn, of course, the magnetic grid is the Earth map for the birds. We know that because they have microcrystals in their skull that allow them to sense very weak magnetic fields. The return of the bird brain. I mean the return of the bird tribe. I mean the Ophanim. Lots of it.
And that relates to the navigator's flag.
Exactly.
Skull and the crossbones.
Yes, the skull and bones.
Which is the Templar, which is the night.
Yes. Which is
maritime.
which is why we call David the navigator. And remember, after you're dead, if you're dead or having bliss or having a lucid dream, the physics are the same. You are a plasma ball. What few of you knew, remember, in a plasma ball, if you take the self-organizing 7-color map delineation, the golden spiral that self-organizes, I wrote the equation, and look at it from the shadows of tetra cube, those shadows are called Hebrew and Sanskrit. And the ability to throw those donuts around at the accurate tilt angles is how you make a golem, and that's what Teresa and Alan are going to talk about later, how you do an Ophanim angel ritual. You visualize a donut here and one here. You throw those donuts around. When they converge, implode. It's called casting a spell. Well, for the physics people here, what you didn't know was the clue to the physics was in the Vimana in the Nazi belt, actually. That when they pumped that mercury doped with a little bit of iron with a wetting agent that made it the red mercury, they pumped it in this spiral on this torus. And the famous Vimana and the Nazi bell flew on the pumping. And we made a little bit of gravity. We were pumping water. We took about a $1,000 pump to do this and we made a few ounces of gravity. But then later, the other engineer with Bill actually said, oh, we're using an aquarium pump. I said, what? He said, oh yeah, well, see, we didn't get the mercury with the iron in it, because you need both the inertia of the water and the inertia of the magnetic flux in the liquid, which is the red. And when you have that much inertia in this spiral on this torus, and you pump that fluid on that translation of vorticity, you make a lot of gravity. Actually, this was called impulse power in Star Trek, as opposed to warp, which is the Niobe, which is another story. Anyway, what you need to know is, this is important for you today, important, is the reason this is your primary inertial navigation device. There you are, an astronaut. You know, how are you going to navigate? I need to steer my jets, right? Steer your jets, and that's how you navigate. Well, when you're dead or lucid dreaming, this is your jet. So by coherently understanding the angles to tilt these magnetic domains, which is everything physics is magnetic donuts. It's all physics is, nothing else. To tilt these donuts at the right angles, then you have the ability to create propulsion. And this is going to replace every form of propulsion on the planet it's because once you know why an object falls to the ground, then you can make gravity, called phase conjugate propulsion. You can read the details, and some of this is thanks to Bill, Elizabeth, fractalfield.com/propulsion. Both the Minkowski-Frost phase conjugate crystal device, which is the lithium niobate, the warp factor of Star Trek, versus the hydraulic propulsion mechanism, which I've just described. So do you see that if you're lucid dreaming, you're like the horse whisperer? Well, you know, in the horse whisperer, what are your instructions? You know what they are? You got to visualize very clearly an extremely simple picture. And some people can't focus long enough, but if you can visualize it very clearly, an extremely simple picture, then what's the next instruction? You know what it is? Learn how to release your thought form. Stamp your foot, send it up, right? Then, only then, will the horse pick it up. If you just stay there focused on it and don't release it, the horse doesn't get the message. So the same is true when you're blowing your donuts. This is called Smoke Ring Science 101 if you've ever been a smoker. And if you're a smoker, it's the only thing you can make, so. All right. So this was, I wanted to give you some more examples from the Templar literature and then just conclude why plasma projection is everything. So the Templar science has these star maps all over Europe. This is the Rochelle grid. Basically, it's Return to the Bird Tribe stuff. This is their Lindisfarne logo. This is William Bueller, who may be the most advanced Templar wave mechanic on the planet. And this is what they call their Rochelle grid. Does that look familiar? Okay. And then they project these things all over Europe, basically all over the world, but in his case they did the science in Europe. This is, for example, Arthur's Seat in Ireland, I think. Wait, Arthur's Seat is the next one down. No, this is Scotland. There's hundreds, there's lots of these pictures. So the Templars were making these magnetic maps using this geometry, and that is called a plasma projector, which is what Amenti Amarna was. So the science of immortality is the science of plasma projection. Now you can just guess what it would take to design a hospital and a burial ground to make this possible. The ancients knew very well how to design a burial ground and a hospital and make this possible. We need to inform our architects of the astral hygiene to make successful birth and death possible. And that's why we're here, is to share that information. Please, go out there and share that. I went into a hospital in Perpignan a couple of years ago, and unfortunately, it was the sickest building I've ever experienced in my life. I mean, I never felt so instantly nauseated in a building in my life. We had low fluorescent lights and synthetic everything, and huge electrosmog, and metal is everywhere. I mean, it was instant nausea, and this was called the hospital. So imagine going there to die. I'd rather die. So, you get the flavor here, that the ability to understand what death is about is an electrical engineering science that's simple symmetry physics. And that's what plasma projection, that's what solar physics. So the other instruction here is go out there and find your soul group. That is the other instruction required. Because the physics for that is simple. Initially, your aura by itself does not have critical inertial escape velocity. So who asked me about Gurdjieff today? Somebody was saying, yes, thank you. So there we are doing the Gurdjieff gymnastic. And this was a Forming Two's Rhythms Division. It was the movie is Meetings with Remarkable Men. And the film at the end, they say, when they did the sacred gymnastic in the movie about Gurdjieff, the strength of the Bliss in the sacred gymnastic was so strong it was burned into the celluloid of the film. That movie is immortal, actually. The movements at the end of that film were real. And you can feel, my hair stands up just talking about it. So, the Gurdjieff is explaining to us via actually our teacher at the time, Pierre Elliott, whose PhD in physics from the Sorbonne was in the physics of flame. And that became flameandmind.com. Okay, and so he's our teacher in the Gurdjieff sacred gymnastic, Pierre Elliott from the Prairie outside of Paris, Gurdjieff school. And he's explaining to us, well, yes, when you start the sacred bliss dance, you need a group. You can't do it by yourself. Why? Because electrically, your aura doesn't have enough inertia, coherence, to actually make enough charge so that you can feel your own bliss when you first start. Eventually, you can make your own bliss, and it's very powerful. You can do it by, but when you start, for most people, you really, really need a group to get the critical inertial escape velocity. And gradually, if you're going to take something, a plasma cocoon, a soul pod, through the heart of the sun, that's very much true as well. So was that a happily ever after?
We've got time for just one or two questions, yeah?
I just have a comment about Glenn's question and your answering it. When you're talking about a tsunami or a tidal wave, that's also called a soliton.
Oh, yes, nice.
The soliton is a half-wave phenomenon, so you're not limited. If you went a full wavelength, you're limited to frequency there.
Right.
Yeah, and so anyway, and that, of course, the soliton then becomes the perfect structure to support superluminosity.
Oh, right. So the soliton is a mechanism to get the exact. And I found the little animation. So this is the original. So remember I was saying here's the up and down is the transverse component. The right left is the longitudinal component. But as the tsunami reaches shore, this is called Raleigh surface wave. There's another one that actually shows how the tsunami reaches the shore, and you see how the one goes to the other. So translating that vorticity is making that L or phase shift. And that's a beautiful thought about the soliton. That would help support. And the soliton is a formation that allows the disciplined crystal geometry thereof, and the disciplined crystal geometry supports the superluminal.
And the soliton wave mechanics is how Guy's machine worked. He created a soliton in the chamber. The environment itself was part of it.
And when we say soliton, you can, in a sense, think of a coherent charged donut that's able to stand by itself. Is the beginning of a way to talk about that, right? When you said yes. Beautiful. Thank you. We're looking forward to working with both your guys. We've got some support for this research now. It's cool. Any other questions, comments, thoughts? So thank you very much. We're so happy you're here. Oh, yeah.
I just wanted to know when it comes to these longitudinal
Yeah.
waves, when the wave hits the ground or the land, and you said it changes and it becomes like a pushing wave.
Well, so see, here we're making a point. This is like Al is just saying. The particle is actually not moving, right? That's not going faster than light. But the wave that carries the information, that could go faster than light. That's the point we're making.
Okay.
Now, about the tsunami was that the inertia inside the ocean traveling faster than a jet engine is not going up and down much, is it? It's compressional this way. But then when it gets to that sloping shoreline, then it's raised up. And then more is transverse. Now see, that is the deeper mystery here, and this is where we go if we, with our support, is that when you recross the longitudinal waves at a distance, they resynthesize that transverse component. And that's when they again support heat. And that is the key to all action at a distance and remote plasma containment. The holy grail of cold fusion. Because you can now contain heat at a distance with microwave conjugate interferometry with no structure. But what you need to know is that the longitudinal wave, when you cross it perpendicularly at a distance, resynthesizes the transverse component, and that's the heat-containing component.
But is it also it creates the longitudinal wave?
See, the longitudinal is compressed. The
The
longitudinal wave is compressional like
yes,
this.
Yes.
The transverse wave is going up and down.
Yeah,
like that,
and the
okay?
one going up,
That's transverse.
transverse.
The transverse contains the heat, and that's the inertia that messes you up in a tsunami. It's the
The
transverse.
tsunami is opposite, just to clarify for us. So we're talking about sending transverse into longitudinal, but in a tsunami situation,
That's right.
it's a longitudinal that gets converted into transverse.
Thank you, Paul. Yeah. So, but understanding that translation of vorticity has everything to do with getting through the light barrier. So when they say ascend already, we need the space in Sedona, what they mean by ascension, what they mean by ascension is the ability to get your attention into that longitudinal wave. And that coherence is teachable. So that tells you probably you need to practice the lucid dream with your bed in the right place. And when you're situating a labyrinth, which we're going to talk about later, or a therapy or a cathedral, you need those magnetic crosses because that embeds in the longitudinal. And more DNA radio is there. The cozy red principle. Yeah.
So longitudinal waves are nested out, right?
Well, remember, the wave is, the particle isn't.
Yeah.
The wave's going, the particle's not moving much, but the wave is.
All right. But in the context of tsunami, is not going faster than light because they are particles.
No. But the,
wave,
remember, the wave front carries the inertia and the information. So it doesn't matter the particle's not going farther. But now that's a bit of a complex story. What does more damage in a tsunami, the longitudinal or the transverse component? That'd be a complicated discussion. But clearly, the compressional wave this way in the tsunami goes vertical as it reaches the shore. And that's more transverse. That's true.
Well, then isn't it the wave actually crashing that causes the effect? I mean, and when it goes up and then gravity, well, it enters a gravitational vortex, it does the spiral.
That's right, beautiful.
So, which also shows a really good example of how gravity is.
And that's Jose Argolla's Surfers of the Cebulla.
Well, here we get into the full wave boundary there, you know. A tsunami or a soliton will go on forever without losing its energy.
It could, if it's going
Unless it hits something.
But
then it could go through it.
One more comment here from
This
Paul,
was
and then I'm going to have to close it.
What you found is that the longitudinal wave
Where does the
is
heat go?
it doesn't mean it's going faster in light. It can go slower.
That's right.
But it has a capability.
Exactly. Thank you again, Paul. Yes. And the capability.
One more clarification,
Yeah.
and I'm going to have to close it,
Yeah.
guys.
Good idea. Yes.
Where does this heat go?
Well, the
Up
heat is,
into
when the wave is traveling as a longitudinal, it will go through about anything. The collective mind, it'll go through the walls of plasma fusion reactor. It'll go through anything. But when it becomes transverse again,
Yes,
then it interferes with everything.
we like what?
Steel will stop it. A lot of things will bump into it. It'll be, and that's why it contains heat better at that. This will travel and doesn't exchange inertia, so it's hard to measure, as you said. Versus the transverse component is easy to measure and contains lots of heat.
But this one is the one which is faster than light.
This has the capability of being faster than light. This one not.
No, but that one
The
has,
longitudinal, yes.
but not the transversal.
That probably won't go faster than
No,
light.
the transversal not.
And we think this is the gravity wave. But I think Roger's right. We kind of had our fun.
So don't forget, we've got another session before lunch.
That's right.
And so your